Hello everyone, welcome to another video. Over the last couple of weeks I was asked a couple of times how can I do Entra ID authentication with my AKS cluster and still have my pipeline access it. And today I want to show you how to do this, and actually it's quite easy. So first off, I want to give you a quick introduction what I'm talking about, and then we're going to switch over to Azure DevOps and I'll show you a demo. So in AKS, Azure Kubernetes Service, we have three different authentication and authorization modes. The first one is local accounts with Kubernetes RBAC. That's the default one and the easiest one to use. The downside is that the token you need to access the cluster is unencrypted. Therefore, everyone could steal it or you can just lose it. Then we have Entra ID authentication with Kubernetes RBAC. That's a hybrid of Entra and Kubernetes. I've never seen it in the past and I don't see a reason to use it. And then we have Entra ID authentication with Azure RBAC. This is the best option we have because we can match all the permissions with Azure. This means as an Azure developer, I just use the same tools and same approach as I use it for other Azure services. What's important to know is to be able to access the AKS cluster, you need one of the Azure Kubernetes service roles. There's a whole bunch of built-in roles. For example, an administrator, a reader, a writer, and you can also create your own custom roles. These roles work the same way as they would work for any other Azure service. What you also have to do is, after you download the credentials, you have to do a kubelogin convert kubeconfig. And then you can have one parameter. In this case, I'm using the Azure CLI, and this command uses the user that's logged in the Azure CLI and sends the token to the AKS cluster with this user. This means my user token with the permissions is sent to the AKS cluster. Azure will check this and then will give me access to the cluster. If there's a user who doesn't have access, then even though they sent their token, they don't get access to my Kubernetes cluster. The big downside with this approach is I think that there's no official documentation how to do it in an Azure DevOps pipeline. For example, in Azure DevOps, we have different tasks like a Helm deploy. There we just select our cluster and then it should work. It works with the local accounts, but with the Entra ID authentication and Azure RBAC, it doesn't work out of the box. So we have to add two additional tasks. And today I want to show them to you. Once you know about them, it's very easy and you don't have to change anything else in your pipeline. But if you don't know them, as I said, I don't think there's an official documentation. So if you know anything about it, let me know down in the comments below. But for now, let's switch over to Azure DevOps and I'll show you my pipeline. All right. Here in Azure DevOps, I've already prepared my pipeline. So let's run the pipeline, and while it runs, we're going to take a look what the pipeline does. So here you can see I kept it very simple. So I have a couple variables. That's the name of my AKS cluster, my Azure Service Connection, the location of my cluster, and the name of the resource group. Then I create a new resource group. Then I'm also deploying my AKS cluster. This means I don't have anything yet. And what's important are the two parameters at the end. Enable AAD and enable Azure RBAC. Since this quite old parameter, AAD stands for Azure Active Directory, which has been renamed to Entra ID a couple years ago. And we're also using the Azure RBAC, what we use for all the other services. Next up, I have to give my service connection the permissions to access my AKS cluster. I could do this hard-coded by just copy-pasting the ID from the Azure portal. But here I use the Azure CLI to get the ID of my pipeline user. This means the service principal that runs the pipeline. I get here the ID of my AKS cluster, and then I do here a role assignment. And I assign the Azure Kubernetes Service RBAC Cluster Admin role. So this is the full admin of the cluster. This means my pipeline can do whatever it wants. Next up, I have to install kubelogin because the Microsoft hosted agents don't have this installed by default. And once I've installed this, I can use it. So first I do an easy AKS get credentials to download the credentials from my Kubernetes cluster. And then I do a kubelogin convert. And this is everything you have to do to be able to access an AKS cluster with Azure RBAC. Afterwards, I have a couple tasks to test it. So first, we are going to use the Azure CLI for kubectl get namespace. And then I'm also using a Helm deploy. So that's one of the built-in tasks of Azure DevOps. So it's nothing I had to install or do. And I configured it with like very basic informations, like my service connection, my resource group, my AKS cluster. Then I'm using the default namespace, and the command I execute is ls. This means this command just does an helm ls. It won't show anything because nothing has been installed, but I also won't get an error message. And I just saw that I'm not using my variable here, so let's quickly fix this while we're waiting for the pipeline to finish. So it's the same name, so I can just scroll down and add the $sign here. So now I'm using a variable, and you can also reuse the entire pipeline. The entire pipeline takes a couple minutes because I'm deploying a complete new AKS cluster. So I'm going to stop the video here, and then we can see if the pipeline was successful. The pipeline is finished and ran successfully. And if we take now a quick look at the steps, we can see here the AKS cluster has been created in less than 4 minutes. The permissions have been set. Then kubelogin has been installed. So I just saw here, I don't have a nice display name. I will also fix this for the version on GitHub. It's also something I forgot to mention. You will find the entire pipeline in the description down below, so you can just easily download it and try it yourself. Then we have the get credentials and also the kubelogin. So you can see it converted the kube config to use the Azure CLI. And after this, we did the kubectl get namespace. So we can see here all our namespaces that are running by default on an AKS cluster. And we can also see here helm ls. As said before, there's nothing been installed, so we don't see anything here, but we also don't get an error message. If you now have another pipeline, for example, to deploy your application, you can do the same. Install kubelogin on a Microsoft hosted agent, and then do the kubelogin with the easy AKS get credentials, and your pipeline will be able to access the Kubernetes cluster. This is already everything I wanted to show you today in this very quick video. So today we have seen how easy it is to use Azure DevOps to access an AKS cluster with Entra ID, Authentication, and Azure RBAC. All you have to do is install the tool kubelogin, and then you use the kubelogin after getting the credentials. From then on, you can execute all the tasks the same way you did before. For example, you can use the Azure CLI to execute kubectl commands, or you can use built-in tools like the Helm deploy to deploy Helm charts. I hope this video was useful, and I will see you next week with another video.